podcast, Preventing Operator Assaults, is a helpful look at the problem of conflict in and on our community transit systems. We hope that by starting a discussion that includes practical tips and ideas, that we can keep transit operators safe in every community, whether they serve in an urban, rural, or tribal transit environment. This project is funded by a grant from the Federal Transit Administration to improve safety for professional bus drivers and public transit riders throughout the nation. Your host is best-selling author and Transit Unplugged podcast host, Paul Comfort.
Great to be with you on Preventing Transit Driver Assaults podcast. This is part 2, an interview we're conducting with Mr. Reem Lazaro, respected trainer in the transit industry for over 30 years. I'll let my co-host, Kristen Joyner, give him his proper introduction.
Yes, Reem Lazaro has been in transit for over 30 years, managing transit and providing great information. Over the last 30 years, he's been a partner in Lazaro and Knoll LLC, a contractor for Boyd Caton Group, supporting the Federal Transit Administration's Bus Safety and Security Program and development of the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan regulation. He's also an independent transit safety and security consultant and trainer. Reem Lazaro has provided training on behalf of the National Transit Institute, the Transportation Safety Institute, and CTAA. He is a safety and security contractor to the New Mexico DOT. Reem's expertise includes consulting on transit safety and security, agency safety and operating plans, safety management systems, safety culture, and safety management leadership for large systems, small systems, and rural systems. Thank you, Reem, for being here.
Wow, that was a lengthy resume. Thank you, Chris.
You recognize that guy, Reem?
No, I don't.
As I mentioned on the part 1, Reem, I remember being in my early part of my career here in Maryland and going to conferences and listening to you and learning from you. Not only was the information you gave very helpful to me as a young transit manager, but you were also one of the coolest guys on the training circuit. So great to have you back on this podcast.
That warms the cockles of my heart, Paul.
There you go. Hey, so we're talking about a very important topic, and this is part 2 of our conversation, and that is preventing transit driver assaults. It is some of the stuff we talked about on part 1 really is required training now on de-escalation. Why don't you give us a quick synopsis of what we talked about on part 1, and then we'll dig in on some more issues.
Okay, before we move to some signs of conflict escalation, what I basically went through is defining what conflict was, defining what de-escalation was, some of the signs, if you will, or some of the behaviors that often lead to conflict, some strategies to de-escalate conflict that is existing between a driver and a passenger, and then strategies to de-escalate conflict that exists between 2 passengers. So that's what we covered.
That's excellent. So if you want to hear those, that training, be sure to tune into part 1 of this podcast interview series with him. Now we'll head into signs of escalation conflict. Reem, you mentioned, and I've heard from other people too, that the sources of conflict a lot of times can happen at the fare box, right? A lot of transit agencies have gone fare free, so that kind of has reduced some of that. But there are signs that drivers and operators can pick up on, right, for conflict. What are some of the signs of escalation conflict?
Okay, and that's absolutely, I can't say how important that is. You've got to be aware of those signs because it's an early warning system for what you might be dealing with, and it puts you in a different sort of headset in terms of not only dealing with de-escalation, but also dealing with protection of the other passengers and yourself. So what are some signs of conflict escalation? And none of these are absolutely in place at all times, but they're good cues, if you will. A sudden change in the tone of voice or volume of voice, clenching fists or tightening and untightening the jaw, fidgeting or pacing around, cross arms, changes in the type of eye contact or even evasive eye contact. The rooster stance with the chest protruding out and arms moving away from the body. Lower of the body, not standing up straight, hunched over, heavy breathing. Raised or hidden hands, and disruptive behavior such as yelling, bullying, defying or refusing to comply with orders. So then we move, Paul, into reducing escalation when you see some of these things in place. And the first thing I would like to talk about in this category is really, really important, and that is aggression. Aggression breeds aggression. Escalating a bad situation into an emergency can be the result of aggression. We do not want to come across in an aggressive fashion. So try to handle the situation from the driver's seat when possible. Respect the offender's personal space. Try to maintain a calm demeanor. Easy for me to say, hard to do. Project a sense of control without being aggressive. So some of the tactics in reducing escalation. First, calm yourself down. Don't get defensive. Even if the insults are directed at you, don't take it personally. Try to look as non-threatening as possible. Listen to the person's concerns without passing judgment. Don't pass judgment. Try to use a kind of low, even dull tone of voice. Try to make a personal connection, like, what's your name, or where are you going to, or whatever. You want them to say yes. It's hard to stay angry if you are saying yes in response to what somebody is saying to you. Treat every passenger with respect. Never, never embarrass or humiliate a person, and don't ever intimidate a person. Speak clearly and calmly. Use repetition. You can certainly reference cameras on the vehicle. Don't be surprised in any way if people overreact. And by the way, don't touch sleeping passengers. They could wake up under the influence, perhaps. They could be armed, and they can wake up very dangerous. Finally, things you shouldn't do in reducing escalation. Make light of a person's experiences. Trivialize people's problems. Dismiss person's feelings. Blame the person. Be sarcastic. Treat the person as unintelligent. Argue moral issues, or expect agreement to develop quickly. These are all things you should not do.
Great. Kristen, do you have a follow-up for him?
I'm just fascinated by how many different things are the do's and don'ts on this. What about dangerous situations, Reem? Can you address that for us, please?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, that is always a possibility. And it's the nightmare none of us want to find ourselves in, but it is out there as a possibility. And again, not just in large urban systems, in small urban and rural systems as well. Happens less often, but when it does, it can be catastrophic. So one of the things you want to do when you've decided this is, you got to use your experience, common sense. You've decided this thing has gotten dangerous. You try at that point to set limits. When passengers' behavior indicates that further conversation is not going to work, you need to lay down the law. Here is the limits of behavior that I can accept from you. You may make it clear, therefore, what your expectations are in terms of acceptable behavior. You state the expectation by, this is really important. It's subtle, but it's important based on a lot of communication theory. You give the negative choice and consequence first. That's the one that you don't want them to take. And you give the positive choice and consequence last. So in other words, don't do this, please do this. Once you've given choices and consequences, it's time to take action. You don't want to appear weak, because that could even make you more vulnerable to danger. So you ask the passenger to comply with your request. You explain why your request ensures a safe environment on the vehicle. You tell the passenger what will happen if they don't comply and if they do comply. You confirm the passenger understands the options, and that confirmation may well not come from them. It may come from inside you. And then you act. ACT, act. You take actions based on passenger response. You request supervisor or law enforcement response. using a panic button or silent alarm if you've got it on the vehicle, or even a verbal emergency code. The point here that I'm making is you don't want to tell the passenger who's about to break really bad on you that you're calling in police or supervision. That could make it worse. You position the vehicle and the doors are open because what you're looking for is a way for yourself to escape and a way for other passengers to escape. And then you think about what your escape routes are. And I want to say one thing, because some of you provide service in rural or remote locations. When you take this action, it's best to find some place where other people may be around, a gas station, a rest stop, a very tiny community, rather than out in the middle of nowhere where you don't have the possibility, at least, of other people coming in and providing assistance. And again, just reiterating what Paul talked about earlier and I talked about as well, don't forget, beyond what we've talked about here, active shooter training following DHS guidelines for all transit employees, not just drivers and supervisors, everyone, on both vehicle active shooter situations and transit facility active shooter situations. So that's kind of wraps up my thoughts here, Paul.
Very good. Good advice, I think, especially on the de-escalation side, tactics that people can use if they get into a dangerous situation. Kristen, anything for the end here?
We'll be providing a handout to the part 1 and the part 2 with Reem Lazaro, so that you not only have a guide to follow and a way to talk to each other as professional drivers, but also so that the management team can discuss what are some policies, what are some ideas that we need to put into place. Also, you'll have Reem's contact information, so that if you want to follow up with him, he can give you more detail.
That's perfect. I would like to say one thing, you guys, before, and I totally appreciate this opportunity. And to those of you who listen to this podcast, I just want to say I totally respect what you do to keep the lives of employees and passengers safe. It's so important. Thank you, and stay safe yourself.
Thank you, Reem Lazaro, for being part of the Preventing Transit Driver Assaults podcast.
All comments, tips, and ideas are the express opinion of the individuals and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Transit Unplugged, the Federal Transit Administration, CTAA, SWTA, TTI, or their subsidiaries. Thanks for listening.